I thought the family and the military was the way out. But I hated this occult side of it because I mean, I saw men become monsters.
You come from a family that people describe it as Illuminati family.
Mhm.
Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a
Yeah.
lot of people are borrowing into. No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the
Okay.
best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like, my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists.
Yeah.
Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to. You know, the Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. You know, like my great grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia.
Hmm.
And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account because it's who you know can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, you know, and they would make these kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the fall, of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, you know, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. It was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames, and he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland. And they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modification purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was died. And the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
If you look up on Google, and I have this up on my screen right now, if you ask, when did the Holocaust start, it says 1933. And I was just thinking about some of the things you were showing in the 20s and 30s here. Now, in Chicago, during the World's Fair, there was a thing called the Century of Progress International Exposition. And this was 1933 during the World's Fair. During that World's Fair, this is like a historical YouTube channel, there was what was called a Jewish historical pageant at the World's Fair. Now, some people say this is like a play, this is like not serious, or they had a literal statue of Moloch that they brought out during the 1933 World's Fair, and they were worshiping this statue of Moloch, like dancing around this statue. This is real footage. This is not fake.
So this worshiping Moloch, yeah, it's just unbelievable. But the Old Testament is full of it. In Leviticus, Deuteronomy, 3 and 4 Kings, Chronicles, Wisdom, they tell us how the surrounding nations around Canaan who were sacrificing their children to demons, that the Jews or the Hebrews were meant to go in and wipe them off the land so this never happened again. They then started imitating that, some of them. Wisdom 12 talks about them offering helpless children, even devouring men's bowels. I mean, really disgusting, with the kind of stuff that it goes on today. And it happened then, like 1500 years BC or 1000 BC, King Solomon started doing it. King Solomon, who's supposed to be the wisest of men, ends up offering children to Satan, which proves that, in case anyone needed to know, he is not the Messiah, nor anyone else until Jesus Christ. But the fact that this stuff was going on of child sacrifice, and the Old Testament warns about it and warns that the Israelites and Jews some of them started practicing it. And it's happening today, then it's not far-fetched to believe with St. Simon of Trent, whose commemoration is today, that it was happening in the Middle Ages, as crucifying little boys as part of their very dark Rituals.
And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out. And I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic, and all of a sudden it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body. And this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You've got billionaires today who admit it on Joe Rogan podcasts and other places, where they're like, yeah, I used the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand. This is a religion, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself.